Welcome, Terri. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Teresa. I am so excited to be here, and I love the work that you do, and I'm happy to be here to visit with your listeners.
Great, thank you. Well, the first question I have for you is really about something that you refer to called the loneliness epidemic. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's really tragic. A recent study from Cigna indicated that half of the American population is lonely. And surprisingly, the hardest hit are not our elderly, it's our youth. And it has health implications of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so this is tragic, and that was pre-COVID. So even now it's more accelerated, and the loneliness and the isolation that people are feeling is really a significant ache, and it's harmful in so many ways, psychologically, emotionally, physiologically. And so that's kind of what, the landscape of what's going on that inspired me to take a deeper dive into what made the kind of communication that I have meaningful and connected. And it's, I just couldn't turn a blind eye. When you look at over 64 million people being lonely, I mean, just sit with that for a minute.
Absolutely. And I agree, the shutdowns have made it so much drastically worse. I don't think we'll know the full impact for maybe a couple of years after this is over, but in the meantime, people are suffering. So I think anything we can do to help is important. Now, speaking of, so the loneliness, I know that one of your approaches to this is communications, and I'm wondering what is soulful listening? If you could describe that, because I know that's your program or your platform is called Soulful Listening. So could you tell us about that?
Yes. I'm going to connect it to what we were just speaking about, the loneliness and the disconnect that people are feeling. And, when I really did some soul searching myself, I realized that there were major missing pieces in how we've learned to communicate. And so then I, created the 5 elements of soulful listening. And it was, beautifully inspired by my Grandma Helga. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But the 5 elements, just so we have a framework to kind of move forward with our conversation, are self-care is the first element. And, oftentimes we don't speak about self-care connected to communication. It is, a really significant missing piece. And oftentimes people will think, oh, I don't have time for self-care. And oftentimes it's a misunderstanding of what self-care really means. I mean, just think about times when you've been well rested, you've had, good food in your body, you've been exercising. When we take care of ourselves, it's almost like, we can relax into the knowing that we are cared for, we're okay, so we can really be present for someone else in a more robust way. And that leads into the second element of soulful listening, which is becoming fully present. Yeah. And I'm sure that we've all been in situations where we've been with somebody and you can almost see a bubble above their head where they've got a laundry list of things that they're thinking about, or their eyes are darting here and there, and they're not with you. And so becoming fully present is a beautiful gift, and it really sets the stage for others to have the courage to become more fully themselves. And then the third element is a combination of active listening and empathy. I kind of say if the two had a baby, it would be this element of soulful listening. And there's so much research on the value of empathy. And, there's been a great body of work on active listening, echoing back what a person is saying. So you are letting them know, this is what I heard, and just kind of checking in and validating, is that what you meant to say?
Yeah.
And then empathy, I love the Native American poem that goes like this: Walk a mile in my moccasins for 2 full moons, so you know where they pinch. Yeah. Walk a mile in my moccasins for 2 full moons, so you know where they pinch. And there's a beauty in that when we become present, when we have the space that's open, when we are fully available ourselves. There's a quality that is quite extraordinary. You know, in fact, when we take care of ourselves and become fully present, we bring a quality of grace and compassion into every interaction.
Mm, that's
And then
fantastic.
and then the fourth element, I kind of call this the secret sauce, and that is inspired action. When we have a connected conversation, oftentimes we'll pick up on something. We can almost have like a bird's eye view of somebody else's life much better than we can our own. And so we make it an insight when we have like a really connected conversation, and maybe we will be inspired to make a phone call on someone's behalf, check into some resources that you can share with an individual. And just remember a time when somebody has taken action on your behalf, no strings attached. Think of how that made you feel. Yeah, it's very, very empowering.
Yeah.
And then the final element is the feedback loop. I'm sure we've had conversations where we felt heard, people are nodding their heads, and then we part ways, and that's the end of it. Well, that falls short. And so the feedback loop is when you circle back with an individual and you let them know, hey, you know, I heard what you said, and, you know, made a call for you and would like to connect the two of you. Or you may have an insight where you can walk alongside a person as they are taking steps more courageously and more boldly into a fuller expression of themselves.
Great. Great. And you mentioned that you were motivated or inspired by your grandmother to do this. So what was that about?
Okay, so that takes me way back to where I grew up, and it was, you know, my beginning experience with loneliness and disconnect. I grew up in a small town in southeast Nebraska by the name of Auburn, and I lived on the second floor of a mansion, which sounds lovely. My parents had turned the bottom floor into a robust, thriving restaurant, and so beneath me, there were clanging dishes, noisy late night bar crowds, banging, and underneath my bedroom every night. And so for a person that has a little quieter, softer temperament like me, that was pretty much torture. And so there was all of this commotion going on all of the time. And what I wanted more than anything, without even being able to name it, was for somebody to hear me and understand me. And there was one person that did, and that was Grandma Helga.
Oh.
And so in her presence, I felt heard and seen on a level that was so life impacting. And when I reflected back after I became an adult and got all of these degrees and all of these experiences, I thought, what is it that made Grandma Helga so uniquely positioned to really lift up others in her presence? And it was, she exercised self-care. And hers looked like having social gatherings with her lady friends, quiet reading time in the kitchen, which, you know, just go with me for a moment. Savory aromas surrounding us, beautiful, quiet moment, Grandma sitting down, looking directly in the eye, and I felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. And so by having that modeled for me, when I was challenged with a limiting sentence, so to speak, my high school guidance counselor, when I went for that senior conversation about what am I going to do next? He said to me, Terri, you're a small town girl. You would get lost in a big city like Lincoln, Nebraska. You need to go to secretarial school and work for your family's restaurant. Fortunately, I had Grandma Helga to go to bounce that lie off of. And she said to me, Terri, look at all I've done without education. Think of what you can do with it. And so the power of a soulful listening conversation changed the trajectory of my life forever, and all of those that I've touched along the way. Had that not been there, my life would have been squelched into smallness. And so that inspired me to take it even, a step further. And because of her, I went on to, accomplish some things that are kind of noteworthy. And I was chair of the American Counseling Association Foundation, which represented 40,000 professional counselors nationwide. Mm-hmm. And then I also was invited to go to the White House twice. I was coaching human-centered design teams from across the nation. And so I look at the possibilities that opened up really central to that important, pivotal conversation. And it made me, inspired to share kind of a roadmap to create the setting, the environment for these deeper level conversations.
I think it's very needed in the world, especially today. That's lovely. That's just a lovely story, and how profound, because I think many people don't feel heard. And I know from our practice, we have a coaching practice and a certification program and all kinds of things. And one of the most surprising aspects to most people is that listening is the most important part of communicating, and we don't do it well. We just don't do it well, but we can learn that skill. So I think that's excellent. One of the things that I read in some of your work had to do with evolutionary communication. And so I'm wondering, what role does mindfulness play in that? And what is that evolutionary communication?
The evolutionary, communication is what I have just described. Okay. I'm describing to you a way of communicating that does not exist in the world right now. Gotcha. And it is attainable. I've seen in small ways and in large ways, by incorporating these, very repeatable steps, it just opens up a world of connection and meaning and higher human potential. So at the center of that, you ask, how is this connected to mindfulness? Only when we are mindful and present can we hold the space for possibilities for someone else.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Only Thank you. And only then can we hold the space for ourselves, for the possibilities that exist within us, thereby, evolving. Yeah, all of us. That's
profound. So soulful listening really is the evolutionary process, right? Shifting how we communicate. Is that an accurate portrayal?
That would be it, shifting how we communicate. And, what comes to mind, too, about being mindful and allowing the space for the conversation to be what it is. Oftentimes, people will go into a conversation having already played out both sides of the conversation. He'll say this, I'll say that, so I'm going to end like this. My advice in that case, don't have the conversation. It's a waste of everything, including emotion, including hopes, including whatever. It limits it. But when we can hold that space and really, really allow the conversation to unfold, magic happens. Yeah. And I think back to, I'm going to give another story, and it's going to be a family story, but it's going to connect what I shared with you about Grandma Helga and how I then repeated that in my life with my own son. And so I was a single parent from the time my son Jacob was 10 years old. And we knew early on that it would be up to the two of us to figure out what was going to happen after high school. You could just let you read through the lines there. And so I would, kind of tune in, and I always communicated with him in this way because it was modeled for me and it worked. And so at 15 years old, I asked him this question: Jacob, what do you want for your after high school experience? And at the time, we're living in Nebraska. I'm a single parent. You can just imagine what all of that looked like. He said, Mom, I'd like to go someplace strong in math and science, and if I could, play on a good football team. Is there a place that has both? Okay. At that moment, I could have just contracted and shrieked and said, how are we going to do that? But what I said at that moment was, I don't know. I will check. I'm on a national board for education. I will check and see what people say. Well, a Southern school kept popping up. And so I went to him and said, people are saying this school has both. He goes, well, we should go. Because he thinks in terms of possibility. So anyway, I'll condense this story. At the end of his sophomore year, didn't even know how I was going to pay for a plane ticket, let alone feed a 300-pound behemoth on the road. We ended up in this Southern school, and a couple days later, we'd met with coaches. He'd met with students, and a couple days later, he looks down at me from his 6'5" perch and says, Mom, I feel like I belong here. And that opened up a world of possibilities for him. I did not do the work. I did not, lift all the weights and run into other 300-pounders. He did all of the work, but I walked alongside of him, and he ended up being the first boy from Nebraska to be given a scholarship to play football at Georgia Tech.
Oh,
He went on and did many, many, many other things since then. But again, I'm just illustrating how the soulful listening conversations have the power to change the trajectory of life over generations as well. Yeah.
Well, I think that that's also a good point to bring up, which is this is not just about adults talking to adults. It's not about age or any other factor. It's humans, right? It's communicating this way with all humans, regardless of their age or position or anything else, right?
Exactly. And imagine a world where parents are tuning into their children with empathy and getting to know where they really are and being able to walk alongside them to help them fulfill their vision of their life, even though it might not be understood to you as a parent. Imagine a workplace where people feel confident enough to really stretch things to the limit and offer bold, out of the box ideas, and they are embraced. Imagine lovers that connect with each other and find more intimacy because they're having real conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't know if you have an answer for this, but one of the questions I get a lot, we do workshops, and a lot of the workshops include communications, and we also do a lot of work with Dr. Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, trying to help people be more empathetic and compassionate in their communications. And one of the most frequent questions I get, and again, if you don't know the answer, that's okay. I have not come up with a good answer, I don't think, but it's just because you want to do it, if the other person doesn't, is there something you can do? Is there something you can do to engage in this kind of communicating at this empathetic level for someone who's kind of shut down to it? Maybe they're totally into ego and it's not their style. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Well, in a way I do. When we attempt to become better, when we strive to become better, everything around us becomes better too. That's a quote from the Alchemist. But what I would also say to that is setting healthy boundaries. We can do our part. That's what we're responsible for. We're responsible for being the best version of ourselves that we can be in the moment. And sometimes when you bring a more relaxed you into an exchange, it has a way of dramatically shifting, I would call it the energy and the outcome. And so that would be, off the cuff. That would be kind of what I would say, because I'm thinking about difficult conversations I've been in where the other person wasn't playing along with this higher level way of interacting.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's real.
Yeah,
that's real.
I agree.
And, for us to we have control over how we respond and react to something. So just be mindful of that, and kind of hone those skills a little bit more, and keep on keeping on. Take one more step, try one more time, celebrate the small victories.
Well, that's great. Great. Thank you. Um, I guess a simple question would just be, what actionable steps could you recommend to our listeners to start moving toward this, or to take the first step, or delve into this? What would you suggest?
Right. That is such a great question. And the 5 elements that I have suggested would certainly be, a place to start. And sometimes we get a little overwhelmed by thinking, how can I do all of it? I would just say, take one step. Take one step. You probably already are, exercising some self-care in your own life. I would challenge you to be aware of when you're doing that, and just celebrate yourself. Oh, I'm doing this to take care of myself. Or maybe just slow it down, and maybe, when you're doing the dishes, you're just really tuning in and mindful of doing the dishes. And when you're in your whole body, that is really self-care as well. And then go for a walk, some small thing. So it doesn't have to be monumental. Maybe look at a gratitude practice. I have a gratitude bowl here. I'm going to hold it up for those that are watching. And each day I put something in. And so one of the ladies that was in a workshop that I conducted recently took that idea and put a bowl on her kitchen counter. And she had like a couple of teenagers who had a lot of teenage friends, and they came over. And so they all puts a piece of, a slip with something that they were grateful for. So when we shift our focus on what we're grateful for, it's as though more of what we're grateful for ends up being in our awareness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think anyone can do that. And I do think it's important that people recognize change is not about changing everything at once, right? So I love starting with self-care, because I agree. If you're not well, you have less to give to others. So that seems one that would be very easy for people to start with, especially under our current circumstances, right? So just to focus on, what are you already doing to practice self-care, recognizing it as that, and also, is there some other thing that you can do? It doesn't have to take extra time. It just takes awareness of it, which of course is mindfulness. So that's
Right.
great.
And then there would be one other thing that is just so easy to do, and that would be to take a breath throughout the day. It doesn't have to be, an hour meditation, although that is wonderful. It can be, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. Done.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I know I'm sure my listeners actually probably get exasperated because I tell them every week to breathe, but it's so important and it's so powerful. So that's fantastic. One thing that we ask all of our experts that come on the show is really twofold. One is to give our listeners ideas, but the second is to really reinforce that regardless of how many tools and techniques you have, how many degrees you have, how much practice you do, we're not exempt from getting stressed. Everyone experiences stress. Right. And it's really a matter of being aware that you're getting stressed, and then what you do in response to it. And so what we ask all of our guests is, what is your go-to technique when you feel stress rising?
Okay, it would be the breath. When I feel it in my body, because I've been doing this long enough that I can feel when I'm like just getting ready to tense up. Mine ends up being around my neck and shoulder area. And it's like the shoulders are shrinking up and up and up. And it's like, okay. So I'll take a breath and then just consciously in my body, let the shoulders drop and be kind to myself. I love Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. Mm-hmm. And in it, there's a really good takeaway, at least for me personally. And it was, kind of an awareness and kind of a challenge. Would you talk to someone else the way you talk to yourself? And that one that one hit me like a brick. It's like, oh, well, no, I would not do that. And so just kind of noticing when your thoughts are spiraling in a negative direction, and just kind of challenge yourself, and maybe even snap your fingers, say stop, and just, recalibrate. Yeah.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing all of your wisdom. And if people want to learn more about Soulful Listening, do you want to share your website or any other suggestions of where they should go?
Thanks. The best way to connect with me is through my website, which is soulfullistening.com. And my email address is terri@soulfullistening.com if you'd like to reach out to me personally. So hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you so much, and I hope you stay safe and well. And I know our listeners really appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you so much. Be well.
Bye.